I'm glad that you guys have taken the time to log in today and go over what is our newfound RPA purchase contract. As far as everybody's concerned, I'm not sure how many people, attendees, are new to the business, have been in the business for a while, but I'm not sure if anybody remembers when the contract, we had 8 pages. Page 8 was our escrow acceptance, and then we went to page 10. So now we have 16 pages. I know that the new contract probably looks a little overwhelming for some, but fortunately, I have been reviewing this contract for as long as it's been out, maybe, well, not actively out, but when it was in its draft stages. So I was very fortunate to be able to go over it a few times and learn what is different. And so hopefully today I'm going to share with you what the new changes are according to escrow, where escrow is involved. I'm not teaching you the new contract. I'm teaching you what escrow is concerned about, tips, tricks, things that you can do to have a smoother escrow without any bumps or hiccups. But what's the fun of an escrow with not a few little speed bumps here and there? Just kidding. So we will start off on page 1, and you're going to just see clippets of the contract, just so we can focus on, so it's not so overwhelming that we're looking at an entire page, but we can focus on what's super important. As you know, this contract looks completely different than the old one. And it feels like there's a lot more information, which there is, but I think the reason why there's many reasons why it's been extended to 16 pages, but a lot of it is because it's compartmentalized now. Like there's, chunks, and it's a little bit, given some more opportunities to provide more detailed information. So on page 1, a lot of the times, when you go through the contract, it sounds insignificant, but it is very significant. A lot of the times that date prepared is very important because we go off that date on our escrow acceptance, and we also go off of other dates on there, and it helps escrow to determine, because we're trying to let you, agents and lenders, buyers and sellers, know how we are perceiving the contract. And the timelines are super important in all contracts, especially this new one. But dates are very, very important when we're looking at timelines, even when the deal might be going sideways, and timelines is what's going to make or break the deal, whether they were met or not. So I know it's insignificant, but a lot of the times people think, oh, they go through the contract and sometimes things are missing and it's not a big deal, but sometimes, but they don't realize that we are the third party we're a mutual party, and we only act upon instruction. So if we don't get the right information and instruction, our perception of the transaction, it might be a little bit different than the rest of the parties. So this is just a little clip of the first page, the top portion of the contract. It looks a little different than the old one. It talks about, who the offer is from. It's very important that we get this information correct, especially for the buyer. Ask some questions ahead of time before you start filling this contract out for your buyers. Maybe ask that question is, do you want to take title as an individual or as a trust? And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because it does make a difference, especially in a cash transaction where a buyer, if they're switching over a trust to take title as a trust, it goes from no notarization to needing notarization, because a trust cert will need to be notarized. So ask that question, looking forward, thinking about these questions, and our sales reps are very accessible, and they can give you the information that you're going to need. But when you ask this question is, how are you going to want to be vested? Like, how are you wanting to submit this offer? Because title and escrow is going to receive this contract, and they're going to take this information and they're going to input it in the system. And that's pretty much how they're going to perceive that you are going to want to take title. So ask that question. Are you going to be taken as an individual? Are you going to take it as a trust? And then those will lead you on to other CAR forms as far as the trust is concerned, or any entity name. An LLC, a corporation, so on and so forth. And reach out to your sales exec and ask them for that lovely vesting form, because it's very informative, and you can hand that form to your client. So you're not being held responsible, because you should not be advising them how to take title. We will not advise them how to take title. We will give them the information and give them the options. And the little sheet does explain which vesting, how it's being taken, but you should not be advising them as well. And then the property description, and then the terms. Agency and confirmation of agency is very important. We take this information. The license number is very important to make sure that that's filled out for the agency and the agent. Those boxes, please, sometimes only one, if it's a dual agency, they'll fill it out for whatever reason, only one side. We need both, so we know, so there's not those questions or extra phone calls, because you guys are busy, and so we want to make sure that we don't trouble you too much. And if we're given the information ahead of time, it's a lot easier. And so the next section that we're going to go over is the terms of the purchase and allocations of cost. So can I get the next screen, ladies?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So this looks a little different than the old contract, right? At first glance, when I first saw this, I was like, wow, this seems a little overwhelming, but I actually love it. Now that I've deep dove into this contract, I love it, because it kind of breaks everything up. It compartmentalizes it. It helps you go through the contract a little bit easier. And when you're either writing up a contract with your buyer or presenting a contract to your seller, I feel like they're able to see these terms a little bit easier. So I hope you're not finding yourself overwhelmed, but we love it. So the purchase price, close of escrow, those are pretty easy, self-explanatory. Expiration of offer, initial deposit. Now this looks a little bit different than what we have seen in the past. So it's very important that you fill this out, and you fill this out in completeness, especially if the initial deposit is going to be delayed, because we are calendaring. When we get these contracts and we see the acceptance date, and we go off of the acceptance dates, and we're contacting these buyers to bring in their EMD in a form of a cashier's check, a wire, a mobile deposit. So it's very important that this is filled out in its entirety. And if it's going to be a delayed initial deposit for whatever reason, there could be various reasons. For example, replacement property or whatever the case may be. So it's very important that you get that completed in its entirety, and any increased deposits and the time frame, because we are going to calendar that. If there's supposed to be an increased deposit 10 days after, 25 days after, make sure you're clear and concise on this section, because we, escrow, will be calendaring that and reaching out to the buyer for that additional increased, whatever the case may be, deposit. And then the same thing, loan amount. If it's not cash, as you can see on 3A, if it is cash, you would mark that box cash, and then we would know that we're not going to have any communication, or we don't need to be looking for a lender to communicate with. But going back down to 3E, the loan amount, fill that out as good as much as you know. It's very important that if you do have a VA loan for your buyer, you do mark that box. So because there's for the ones that you are new to the business or don't know, there's certain VA fees or closing costs that the veteran cannot pay for. So it kind of gives us a heads up when we're working with the lender, and when we're doing those estimated sellers net sheets, so we know what we're having to put the buyer's costs onto the seller. So, and it's a very good idea to let them know, because there's certain costs that the veteran cannot pay. And then any additional amounts financed is that there's a second, down payment assistance. So it's very important that we know that as well. Occupancy type is super important. So then we know, as we're inputting the data for the buyer, if this is a principal residence, if this is a secondary. So we know that, for correspondence for future, we try to make sure our file is complete and has as much information as possible. And then the balance of the down payment and purchase price total, which should be the same as 3A. So the purchase price total should match. It's like, why would you say that? That sounds silly, and you would be surprised, because people are still getting used to this contract, and we're still seeing kind of variations, which I don't understand. I don't know if it's anyhow. And then at the bottom of the page, this contract is a lot of pages. And so it's very important that your buyers and sellers initial the bottom of each and every page. I know that there's some certain pages that the initials are in the middle, and it's for certain things, mediation, arbitration, all that good stuff. We are looking for the initials at the very bottom. Okay.
And I don't think we let people know. I can't see the chat. So if there's somebody having questions in the chat, please let Anna know, Robin or Brad or somebody. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't see the,
I can't see the chat at all.
I can't chew gum and walk at the same time. So if you want me to teach the class and do the chat, it's not going to happen. So yes, please somebody monitor that chat for me. Okay, so the next section is the paragraph for title and contract terms for seller credit, if any, to the buyer. This is going to be where if you want the seller to credit a certain amount of percentage or a certain dollar amount to go towards the buyer's closing costs. And if your buyer is working with a lender and they are very particular in how the closing costs are credited and to what they're credited, have that conversation with your loan officer while you're filling this out, or when you're filling this out, or before, so you know that you're going to be inputting the correct information.
Can't see that person, Anna. Sorry, I can't see who's talking. Somebody mute, please. Sorry, go ahead, Anna.
That's fine. So you're filling that information out correctly. It's just going to save you some time, because if a lender receives this contract and they're not approving the credit because it was worded a certain way, have that conversation with your lender to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Okay, so this is where you would do additional finance terms. Anything can be put in there. I've seen already, Anna,
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're talking about up there on G1 5E seller credit to the buyer, how about right now we're dealing with buyers giving seller credit? Would that be in there, or do we need to put it in the additional financing term?
That's exactly where I was going to put where buyers are giving the seller credit is where you would put this additional finance terms. Or I've seen where the buyer is going to pay above and beyond their appraised value. I've seen that here. But yes, definitely, if you are having your buyer credit your seller a certain dollar amount through the escrow, then definitely would be G2. Okay, great question. Thank you. The next section, the verification of all cash sufficient funds. Basically, your all cash, that's going to be between you, the parties. Escrow really doesn't get involved with the verification. The only thing we get involved as far as funds is we have the good funds law that we have to abide by, and basically stating that if we receive a cashier's check for any kind of closing funds or your closing funds, those funds have to be banked. Even though it's a cashier's check, we have to it has to be banked, and then we are unallowed to negotiate those funds until 24 hours. So for example, we bank a cashier's check, which is for closing funds on a Thursday morning. We are unable to close until Friday, because that cashier check has to be banked. Our banking is done in the afternoon. And so once it clears once it's deposited, then we can negotiate those funds the following day. If it's a wire, it's same day. I do want to make a little bit of a note to support your deposits. and to support your closing funds. If you have a cash transaction and it's less than 10 days, it's not advisable for any funds to be deposited as a personal check, because we have to wait, and we have to bank that personal check, and we have to make sure that we have to wait for it to clear. And I know it seems in this day and age, it does seem like 10 days is a little bit lengthy, but we have to make sure that these funds are good, hence good funds law. We don't want to disperse funds that surprisingly come back NSF or whatever the case may be. And then also, if your seller or your buyer is submitting funds via official check or teller check, a check that comes from a credit union, that is not a cashier's check. We are unable to close the following day if closing funds come in the form of official or teller credit union check. Credit unions can wire just as easy as any other institutional lender. So I just wanted to do that as a side note. And this kind of goes all over, kind of touches a little bit with these verification of funds. Okay. So these are your contingencies. The reason why I like to I just touch on this is because a lot of it is basically between the buyer and the seller and the agents, making sure that these, the contingencies and time to remove contingencies, because it does involve escrow every so often, because it depends on the negotiations and the terms of the contract. If something is supposed to happen, that escrow is involved, whether it's an early release of a deposit or, removal of a loan contingency, goes hand in hand with the early release of deposit, or an additional deposit. The reason why I just want to go over this little section, because it's not our job to track the time frame for the removal of the contingencies, but I just like to mention, because every once in a while, depending on the terms in the contract, it does give us some instruction of if there's an action to be taken once these take place, the removal of the contingencies. Okay. And then L8D14A, review of seller documents. So that all depends on, for example, disclosures, I guess, seller's disclosures. The next one would be preliminary title report. A lot of listing agents, just this past 18 months, I want to say, have ordered prelims ahead of time. They can't and should not be ordering prelims before a listing agreement is signed. But once a listing agreement is signed, we found that it's very advantageous for the preliminary title report to be ordered ahead of time before you have an offer, because it's it helps with this time frame, and it helps to get ahead of things. Should you have a surprise come up on the preliminary title report that you weren't aware, that your seller did not know of, or whatever the case may be, it gives you an advantage. And so we will order a preliminary title report only if you have that listing agreement signed, and of course you on the honor system, that when you get that offer, you bring that transaction to Chicago Title. But it's the same thing. There's a certain time frame that the preliminary title report has to be disclosed. And then the other items really don't have anything to do with escrow, but I just wanted to show this section because there was a few things that do impact us in this section. Okay.
Anna, how about HOA documents? I know you guys have no control of it, but you order them. Sometimes those suckers have taken longer than that time period.
Yeah, that's our next slide.
Lisa's jumping ahead on us.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Fine. I love it. I love the interaction. No, keep it coming. It calms my nerves. Okay, time of possession is basically you, whatever when we're on record, if there's going to be an extensive time where the seller is going to be in possession of the property after the recording, or when it's supposed to, So when we go on record, we'll send our information out, whether it's text or email or a phone call saying we're on record, depending on your relationship with your escrow officer and how you've already told your escrow officer how you like to be communicated. And so this will just be a supportive of when time of possession. And then this M27C, seller occupied or vacant units. It's super important. If this applies, it's super important that you let us know, because if there is going to be seller in possession and there is going to be additional funds to be handled through escrow, whether it is a rent back or a deposit because you're a security deposit because the seller is in possession, like if that is the case, it's super important that you mark these boxes correctly, because we do look at these things and we read the contract, and so we don't want to miss where we're supposed to hold back a certain amount of money from the seller's proceeds to disperse to the buyer at close of escrow, because the seller is going to stay in the property for a specified amount of time. So, and then the next one, M3, is just as important. If it is a tenant occupied unit, let us know. Mark these boxes appropriately, accordingly. There's times where it's not told to us, it's not mentioned to us, it's not even in the contract, and we get an estoppel at the close of escrow, and the buyer estimate has already gone out, the seller's estimate already gone out. So those numbers are not, it is an estimated closing statement, and we do disclose on that statement that they're estimated figures, but sometimes these security deposits are pretty, big. They're over, $1,000 or whatever the case may be. And so that can impact, the buyer's closing, the bottom line. Because, if it's not going through a management company, it does change that bottom line. So super important. If you have a seller in possession or you have a tenant occupied property, don't bypass this section. Please mark the box appropriately, and then supply the supporting documents, your SIP and your estoppels for the tenants. So, and then the next section is documents, fees, and compliance, seller delivery of the documents, sign and return escrow holder provisions, HOA, and then the install the smoke alarms. We don't really has anything to do with us, and evidence of representative authority, depending on who the seller is. If they work with that, if the seller works with that escrow officer, often the escrow officer will have, the corporate docs, the LLC docs, the trust docs, whatever the case may be, to help you facilitate maybe providing those. But let's skip back up to the seller delivery documents. That kind of goes hand in hand with the HOA. So I'm going to talk to you about that, and then I'm going to go to N219B about the provisions. So HOA, you're right, Lisa, those take quite a bit of time. What happens is HOAs, they typically run at their own pace, but the most that I've seen, they've said that it's up to 10 days from the time that either they're requested, if there's no payment required, or from the time that the payment is made. So there is a little bit of a delay. If you're dealing with an HOA management company that requires payment, there's going to be a time. So we have to make the request. And then if they have a turnaround time of responding to a request, and they're an HOA company that requires upfront payment, so now we're dealing with a longer period of time. So we make our request, then we get notified back that, okay, we received your request, we require an upfront payment. And then we get the seller to make that payment, and then the clock starts ticking. So if you have a property that you have listed that has an HOA, pre-order that prelim and get your escrow unit to order those HOA docs on time. Now, I'm going to do a little bit.
Because I was going to ask about that. If we got the listing, and we're already giving you guys the information on the listing to get the prelim, that would be the time to order the HOA. But then I was told that, let's say it doesn't get accepted right away, or there's a hold or something, that if there's time and been, the HOA documents are only good for a certain amount of time. Is that true?
Yes, and that's, I want you to teach this class with me because that was my next statement. I was gonna say, having said that, if you have your escrow unit order the HOA, certain document, depending on the time frame or when in the month that they're ordered or when in the quarter that they're ordered, if that HOA has another meeting or the court, with the quarter of the month, and they met about any given topic, financial, whatever, and they have those minutes published, depending on when they were ordered and when you actually have an offer in, and we were delivering those HOA documents to the buyer with all the minutes and financials and bylaws and everything, that HOA might have to be updated because you have to provide the buyer with the most updated HOA doc package possible. So it shouldn't take the HOA that long to provide updated minutes, because basically that's all you're going to get. Any updated minutes, or if anything financially has changed from the last package, they'll update you with the updated minutes and any financial changes. So yes, you're right. They're only good for so long, but we have updated HOA docs. We've updated HOA demands because if it's a monthly, we need it, and we've gone past it, and the minutes and any, if it applies, any financials. So, but you have to understand that these HOA companies, like, there's no skin in the game. They're going to get their HOA dues, whether the property sells or not, from either the seller or the buyer. So they kind of work on their own pace. And if your buyer, it's the transaction and those contingencies and all those are in place, and there's something iffy about that HOA, it may make you go past your timeframes. So it is a good idea. I know that it says that they're only good for someone. It's not hard. It's not difficult to update.
Anna, I don't know how often that an update has been done, but do you notice that the HOA is only charging a little bit for an update, or are they recharging the whole package again?
That's a hard question to ask or to answer, because there's so many HOA managements in our county that they're all different.
Okay.
They're all different. They're not going to charge you the full amount because they're not giving you a full package.
Right.
But I wish I can give that answer to you, but it's just, it's too difficult to
Anna, I have a question. If you're listing, let's say the escrow cancels and you're opening up a new escrow, but you've already got the HOA docs, can you use them again, or no, they have to be ordered again by the seller? They have to pay for them again?
No, we can transfer them to the new file, but we definitely have to order an update.
Okay.
Okay. All right, next page, please.
Okie doke.
So, funny, there is this, I know why this doesn't really get filled in, because a lot of the times it just says seller choice. So this natural hazard disclosure, it's in a perfect world. The company that the natural hazard disclosure should be ordered from should be filled in, but a lot of the times it just says seller choice. So the only thing that I can do to help, with a smoother transaction is when the listing agent, it does get filled out and it says seller's choice. When the listing agent sends that contract to the escrow officer, in the body, just throw in, like, if it does say seller choice, just let us know who we need to order that NHD, so we can get that NHD ordered. They're fairly quickly. We get them within 1 day. They're super fast. So time frame wise, it's not detrimental, but I just kind of want to put that out there. It's just like, do your escrow officer a favor and just say, hey, can you order the NHD with XYZ? I have agents actually that order the NHD themselves. When they order the preliminary title report ahead of time, once they have listed, because that's one of the disclosures that they like to upload into MLS to make sure that any offers that come in, that's already there along with the preliminary title report. So it's all just what, to each his own. Then I'm going to skip down to escrow fees, Q719B. That is pretty much self-explanatory. You can just mark the box accordingly. And I'm just going to.
So Anna, somebody asked me this question actually yesterday. They wanted to know each pay their own. Does that just mean what's normally in standard and customary in Fresno County?
Yes, but be careful because when you are doing in Fresno County, yes, absolutely right. That's the answer. But if you're dealing with a property outside of Fresno County, you can't just assume like it's going to be whatever customary is in Fresno County, because what's customary in Fresno County is not customary in Madera County.
Correct.
Believe it or not.
Correct.
So the two counties are very close together. So just be very clear on what you're negotiating. And then, so mark, buyer, seller, both, each to their own. If you want to put both and then actually type out in that line to be clear and concise. And then to the right, escrow holder should always, always, always be Chicago title. Just to be clear.
Good answer, Anna.
Okay.
Anna,
yes.
Anna, I just wanted to ask, I've had an agent ask me the other day, is there any way to explain the difference, or is there a difference between escrow fees being marked both 50-50 versus each to pay their own? Would there ever be a time when that would calculate out differently?
The county. Because if you're not sure if you're outside of Fresno County and you're not sure to pay their own, because pay their own means whatever's customary in the county that the property is in.
And we have a really good flyer on that, Anna, just so you know. We have what's standard and customary in different counties. We have a great flyer. Just ask your rep, we can get it to you.
But if we weren't sure, would it still be better to check buyer and seller? And then put 50%, or, I mean, that's what we used to do before.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to more information that you can put in there just to make sure that it's not misconstrued or perceived to be different. I definitely would mark both boxes and then put 50%, because this is just typically what's just for the escrow fee. We're only talking about the escrow fee in this section because we'll go over the title part. So if you're not sure in what county you're presenting this offer in, what their customary is, I definitely recommend to mark appropriately and go ahead and type in that line and say, this is how we're submitting this offer to the seller, that how we're going to pay these escrow fees. So I definitely recommend that if you're outside of Fresno County. The owner's title policy, this is different in other counties. So typically Fresno, the seller pays it, and typically we see seller. Sometimes, that's typical. This last 18 months or so with the market, people trying to get their offers accepted, they're marking buyers to pay for the owner's policy. So it all depends. And then it says title company, if different from escrow holder. That's if you're in Southern California. A lot of the title companies are standalone, and escrow companies are standalone in Southern California. So if you are dealing with a property in Southern California, you're definitely going to have to make sure that you put that information in there. And so that's why it's, because you got to remember, this contract serves the entire state. And then buyer's vendor's policy insurance, it's up and down the state. It doesn't matter where you're at. It's typically, that's the buyer's responsibility. If they're getting a loan, they pay for the policy. I'm sure if it was a different market, maybe in additional information, you can mark that the seller to pay for the buyer. I've never seen it, but it's a possibility. County transfer tax typically is seller. If you want to do anything different, they provide you a line to decide for something different. We do not have city transfer tax here. So that shouldn't be marked if we were dealing with Fresno County. HOA fee preparation disclosures typically are the seller. Certification fee, that's something that some lenders request. So it's a lender request, which is usually a buyer responsibility. And then HOA transfer fees, negotiable, typically are sellers, but they're negotiable. And private transfer fees. I got to look into this. I'm not sure if it was all hearsay, but someone along the line somewhere in one of my trainings may have mentioned that these private transfer fees are basically the endowment fees, these subdivisions that get built and they do like a charitable endowment. And every time a property sells, whether it sells 1 time, 10 times in that specific subdivision, and they've allotted a charitable endowment, a certain percentage from the sales price goes to that charitable endowment. So that's where this private transfer fee would come in. And then typically it's a seller. But someone, I don't know, I've got to do a little bit more research. So I'm kind of like, probably shouldn't be mentioning this, but somebody said they might be going away. I don't know how you would do that because it's a recordable.
It might be going away on new, Anna. They said something about it being illegal now. I was on that same call you were on, so we do need to research it.
Yeah, so we'll have to research it a little bit more, but that's what that is all about. And then any additional items, reports, whether it's pest, roof, well, like this is where you can put those in and let us know. Please let us know, because sometimes it's a surprise that we're having to deal with septic or well and who's paid for what and the water testing and so on and so forth. So please put that in this section and let us know who's responsible for that. And the home warranty. Is self-explanatory. Who is it going to be? Is it going to be waived, or is it who's going to pay for it? And who is it coming from? We do not order home warranties. We just need to know who are we expecting the home warranty from. Okay.
Are we to write in the actual plan of that home warranty? Because I was like, what the heck is that section for?
Just who you're ordering it from.
No, because when we have it populated from our cover sheet, it automatically go back. Where are you? Okay. It actually puts it right there where it says issued by on the next section right there. But then you have the home warranty plan. And we're like, what goes in there? And then you can put buyer, seller, but it automatically, the issued by is right there under where it says buyer waives home warranty plan. So what are you guys looking for in that home warranty plan? Would that be the actual plan?
I've seen here where they've talked about seller's coverage. I've seen where they've talked about 2-year home warranty. So they've used that line for additional information, but there's no, like, I've also seen it blank, and then the issued by says fidelity or whatever, whoever home warranty you're going with. So those lines are just for additional information, maybe seller's coverage, maybe like I said, 2-year home warranty. The next section is
sorry, I lost my cursor, Anna. Go ahead. Okay.
Sorry. The next section is important to us because it allows us to understand what the situation is, whether it's a probate, it's tenant occupied, if there's a manufactured home on there. So
somebody needs to mute, please.
That'd be,
and so this section just is information for us. So if your situation applies, please mark the appropriate box, because it lets us know where our transaction's going and how we need to handle the transaction and what we need to be looking for. So, so on and so forth, basically probate, manufacturer, tenant, tenancy in common, stock property. That's not something that you're going to see often. So I don't want to open that can of worms. Any addendums, and then here's your septic and so on and so forth. If there's a short sale, that's not something that we deal with right now in this market. And so that's all escrow is looking for in this section, just to give us information. It's some more information on what we're dealing with, especially if we haven't ordered a preliminary title report and it's not giving us a lot of information. If it's a fixed mobile home or a probate. Okay. Next section is title investing. That just kind of goes over that, the buyer has to, how they're going to take title, what is their vesting going to be. So this is just a little bit of a paragraph that you want to pay attention to, go over with your buyer, this paragraph lets the buyer know that they have 5 days after receipt of the preliminary title report to provide us our vesting. And the reason why, and it's super important to meet that deadline, because we're working with the buyer's lender, and the buyer's lender needs that vesting like 9 times out of 10 pretty quickly, and we have to give them our paperwork, provide them the vesting. So it's just going to help run your transaction a little bit more smoothly.
Same. Do you want me to go for?
Yeah, this is the same. Okay, so the demand to close escrow. The reason why I'm outlining this is if you are having to issue a demand to close escrow and delivering that, we don't necessarily get involved with that, but we definitely need to know that this is happening, so then we can be aware if we're starting to look for something, or reach out to the lender to say, hey, where are you at? Because we have a demand to close escrow, we haven't received loan documents, so on and so forth. So if you are reissuing a demand to close escrow, let your escrow officer know that it's happening, so we can be on alert for you. So we could, because at that point now it's like, we got to go, we got to make this file a priority. Time is of the essence. And then the effective cancellation of deposits, when a transaction is being canceled, again, we're a third mutual party. We go upon instruction. We are unable to release any deposits to any party unless it's mutually agreed for and signed for on a official cancellation instructions. We only act upon instructions. If somebody calls and says, I want my deposit back, they're not going to get the deposit back. If it's in dispute, we will hold on to the deposit until the dispute is reconciled. If someone goes missing and is not responding, we do a 10-day letter. So just review that and review. Oh, I'm sorry. I know I'm kind of going through this real quick. I did forget about the general provisions. I said I was going to go back, and I know that there's lots to cover, but they're very.
Right here, Anna.
One more. Sorry, I'm so sad that I right here. Just give me some grace. This is the first time I'm teaching this class. The general provisions N219B. Those general provisions can be issued to you at the time of your page 16 being issued to you, the escrow acceptance, because you do have a time frame that those general provisions have to be disclosed and distributed. If you're not getting them when you are getting your page 16 from escrow, ask for them. It's not rocket science. We don't type them up. They're already typed up. They're ready to go. As long as the escrow is open, they're accessible. So ask for those general provisions, because now in the old contract, there was no time frame. There was nothing that had anything. But now that it's there, ask for them. Okay. Sorry. Fast forward.
Okay. And ours are different than anybody else's, right, Anna?
Exactly. Okay. Joint escrow instructions. I'm just you can read this on your own. I'm not here to explain this because this contract belongs to you, but I'm pointing this out because a lot of lenders outside of California, a lot of lenders in Southern California, ask for escrow instructions right from the get-go, right when escrow is open. And I said, I kindly say, do you have a copy of the contract? And they say, yes, we do. And I said, if you look at the title on the front page, and if you look at paragraph 19, you are in receipt of our escrow instructions, along with our page 16, our escrow acceptance. So that deems and serves as escrow instructions. So if you get a lender calling you saying escrow is not cooperating, they're not giving me my escrow instructions that I'm asking for, all I ask is to support the escrow unit and say, do you have a copy of the contract? Can you please look at the title? Can you please look paragraph 19? Have you gotten page 16 with their acceptance? Because I can't tell you how many times when we get a lender from outside of California or Southern California, they plant their flag and they're not moving it. So that's where I want just to point out to you, it used to be a different paragraph. I think it was paragraph 20 or 22. Now it's paragraph 19. So we had to retrain our brains to say paragraph 19. Those are the, I think this is continuation of the joint escrow instructions
Okay.
on here. So again, I'm not going to read these for you. I encourage you all to go through this new contract with a highlighter and just read through every single thing, because you need to make sure that you understand what this contract is. Buyer's offer. I highlighted this area because it does support what I was saying at the first page, that if you're going to be a buyer and you're an entity that is buying, make sure that this is complete as well, because we're going to be looking for this information, like who's going to be our signers, that you need to provide that additional CAR form that supports who our signers are. So please fill this portion out accordingly and completely. Okay, and then your buyer is going to sign this and print name of legal authorized signer, date, and then if there's more than one buyer, there's your 2 lines. If there's more than 2 buyers, you have a CAR form that will support additional signatures. Okay, next page, please. Okay, acceptance. We're looking for that pretty little box, the seller counter offer, because we need to make sure if we're looking for additional terms that will change either the sales price, the length of escrow, any credits, any kind of change. So if you have a seller counter offer, please mark the box appropriately. And then it goes down to the seller's entity, same as you're going to have to have a conversation, or kind of, I know everybody pulls property profiles, so I know that it's difficult sometimes for selling agents to complete this information, but it's basically for your listing agents, that if that's what, if they're an entity, they need to mark this appropriately as well. Okay, and same thing with the signature lines on the buyers.
And excuse me just for 1 second. Hey, Jane Schmidt, since you're still on the call, would you put that in the chat for us that you just emailed me? She actually has that private transfer fee bill that she just emailed
I'll
me
do that.
as a link. If you can put that in the chat for everybody, that would be great.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Jane.
And then this is super, super important, especially if there's multiple agents, because oftentimes people co-list and co-sell. So fill out as much information as possible on here. The firm, the agent's name, license date. I can't tell you how many contracts I get and there's no email addresses, or there's no cell phone numbers. And it's not hard for us to find you. But when we're opening this order, we want to open it up its entirety. We don't want any information missing. So if you have the information, just fill it out, and just, it'd be very helpful.
You know what, Anna, on the old forms, because a lot of us agents, we use the zip forms that have a cover sheet. You put everything in the cover sheet and it transfers everything over. I do notice since they've updated these forms that our email addresses are not shooting over. They're not. So we're going to have to check that more closely, make sure our information's in there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's difficult for us because we don't know what it looks like on your end, like the operating system. It's kind of difficult. I know that sometimes maybe escrow is asking a lot, and it's only because we don't know what your platform looks like. So whatever you can do to give as much information to escrow as possible is appreciative, because we really, really want to do a good job for you guys. That's our
Do we care if signatures are a squiggle?
No, because we can't tell people how to sign. If that's their legal signature, that's their legal signature. So, but yes, we want to do we just want to do a really good job for you and your clients. So that we just need as much information as possible. The next page is our escrow holder acknowledgement. This is what we fill out. This is page 16, no longer page 10, no longer way back when page 8, but we will fill this out. We will mark the box accordingly if we have the deposit. This is what our communication to you saying, we're accepting this escrow. I'm marking this box, that I understand that the deposit I received is for $5,000. And I understand that there's 2 counter offers. a buyer counteroffer, a seller counteroffer and a buyer counteroffer. We understand that there's an addendum. We've received these things. This is the escrow holder. I'm signing this as Anna Gettman. My license number is 2994-3. I am part of the Department of Insurance. This is my escrow number and the date I'm accepting this. And this is the date that I understand the acceptance of the agreement is. Please, we are human. It's perception. If we have that date wrong and you have something different, pick up the phone or send a quick email and say, hey, I noticed that your acceptance date is February 14th. It's actually February 12th. So look at this page when we give it back to you to make sure that we understand what you understand. So, and that goes hand in hand with, that will, go out with your general provisions. Yes, the contract is only considered fully executed when initialed by all parties. We need, I don't know why, sometimes I get a contract, it's initialed and signed by the buyer, and then I get a seller counter, and the seller counter is signed, and I'm asking for the seller to sign the contract, and for whatever reason, some agents were like, no, that's this, they signed the seller counter, so that deems the contract executed. And I'm like, no. So, and even though some of the terms that the seller didn't agree on the original contract, it still needs to be signed, hence why you issued a seller counter to counter out those terms. Getting the contract information for all parties is essential to a smooth escrow. I think I said that 100 times today. So that's it. I am sorry if I went too fast. It was a lot to cover. Again, my first time teaching this subject. I do teach often, but this was a new subject, and I'm sure we'll go over it again and have another class. But thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
There was a question about from Mary Graham. She said, it looks like this RPA is maybe an original being 16 pages. It's now 18 pages, so some lines are different. I was fairly certain we were using the released copy of the contract, but do you know what that may be referring to?
I don't know if the 18 pages is additional like advisories. I just pulled the 16 that we deal with. We don't deal with state, the buyer advisor. We don't deal with any of those other disclosures. So I'm not quite sure if she's counting maybe additional disclosure pages that go with the contract. I know there's 2 pages ahead. There's a wire fraud, and there's all these other pages that come with the contract when we get it. We only are concerned with the 16 pages.
And then we did clarify there's no city transfer tax in Fresno. Is there any place in the contract that addresses the county transfer tax in case that's out of our county, or is that in the customary practices?
There's always county transfer tax, as I understand, throughout the state of California, no matter what county you're in.
Okay. All right. If anybody had.
Oh, I have one more, Anna. So we were talking about the counter before, because they updated the counter page too. So before, when the counter was signed by the seller, let's say the seller counter offer, signed by the seller, then it's signed by the buyer. It used to have to where the actual acceptance was on the buyer, whether it was from the seller or from the agent. That's not there anymore.
Okay.
I just did one and I was like, where's the bottom part where the actual acceptance is?
Well, are you talking about the acceptance on a counter, or are you talking about the acceptance on the contract?
So when you do on the contract itself, the new one, you have the section there where they're accepting offer, but you also check on there that there's a counter. But then you submit the counter with the seller signature, then the buyer, if they agree to it, they sign it. Before, even though, because the old contract had the same thing, you would check a counter, even though the seller signed it, but the counter would have at the very bottom once the buyer is signed, the seller is accepting the actual transaction or the contract itself. That's not there anymore. So
Okay. So your question is, clarify what your question is for me.
I'm just making a statement, basically.
Oh, okay.
Because before the contracts have changed, on the contract, you would always have, the seller would sign it, that they accepted, however, there's a counter that's coming along with it. When we would send out the counter, the seller signed the counter, the buyer would agree, and then at the very bottom, when it came back to us, the seller would either initial or the agent would initial that they received and they accepted the actual contract. That's not the case anymore. So now on the new contract, it has the checkbox for the counter and the seller to sign. When you send out the counter, that's only the seller counter, and then the buyer finishes countering. My understanding, until that whole thing's accepted, then the seller, then we would go into contract. And there's times where a buyer would send back the counter and the seller may have had another offer right before the counter come back or right at the same time, and then they decide to go with the new buyer. So before, the seller would have to initial at the bottom, and we would give it back to the buyer that, hey, now we're in contract. I'm just stating it's not that way anymore. And so I'm wondering how that's gonna affect things. Because now on the counter, you just have the seller signs the counter, sends it to the buyer agrees, signs it. Okay, so now we're automatically assume we're in contract.
Okay. I'll have to look into that, because that might be something that might become an issue.
Yep.
Even for escrow, when it gets down to